Hello, hello, everybody, and happy Monday. We are back with another LinkedIn Live interview, but today is really a very special one for me, and I'll get to that in a minute. Just a quick reminder: we are streaming this also to my YouTube channel. So if you want to watch the replays, if you want to get back to some of the old episodes, go to YouTube. While you're there, subscribe, like, share, and yeah, but now back to the interview, because we only have about 30 minutes, and this is really a topic that I'm very deeply passionate about. You all know that I love the soft skills and communication stuff and so on, but I also like big data. I love business intelligence, and I was trying to find somebody who can speak the geeky language in a way that we entrepreneurs and leaders can understand it. And thanks to Brendan, who was my guest a few weeks ago, I was able to connect with Simon. And I think he's absolutely the perfect guy to introduce this topic to us. So, pour yourself a cup of coffee or a glass of beer, relax. And yeah, Simon, it's a huge pleasure to have you here. I'm so very happy that you are my guest. But would you mind quickly introducing yourself to the audience first, and then we'll go from there?
Excellent. So it's a pleasure to be here, Miha, and thank you for that introduction. I am very technical, as you said. I mean, I'm not the expert on soft skills, but hopefully I can bridge the gap between technical and business and provide some insight into what we're about to talk about today. Hi guys, my name is Simon Nuss. I am the father of two wonderful children living in Toronto, Canada. The accent is Australian, if you're wondering. And in terms of my career and my passion, it's really around the data and analytics industry. So I'll give a bit more of an explanation later, but at a very high level, I see myself as a data engineer and a visualization expert as well. And in my day job, I am the director of data and analytics at Hitachi Solutions, where I lead a large team of specialists who provide services to help any organization interested in adopting data and analytics. So specifically, we automate business processes, we consolidate company data into a central repository, and we develop reports that contain analytical insights so that our clients can make better and more informed decisions. So that's effectively what I do in my day job. And so for me to lead effectively, I must maintain that deep technical understanding in my field, and I'll try not to go too deep today. So Miha, I'm excited to be here. Looking forward to peeling back that onion in terms of some of the things that I've mentioned.
Yes, absolutely. And to everybody who is or will be watching a replay, Simon did agree that we do a two-part interview. So we are going to do a bit of an introduction today into the whole topic, because I do know from the conversations I have with fellow entrepreneurs that they're often unfamiliar with this topic. And then next time, in about a month, we will dive quite a little bit deeper and be a little bit more technical. But today we're going to stay on mostly the top level. So Simon, when entrepreneurs start their business, of course, they are passionate about the thing that they do and they deliver. So most of the time, they will just focus on marketing and sales because they need to make some sales so that they can deliver whatever they're passionate about, whether that's a product or a service. And most often, they will stay in that cycle. And as they start growing, they mostly focus on things that are generating cash flow, which is cool. And that needs to be done. And sales must never stop. But as we grow, as we go from 5 to 6, 6 to 7, and 7 to 8 figures, that backend stuff, the support and the backend becomes more and more important. Having system in place, having processes with KPIs and benchmarking and understanding those things, and then having an overview over data becomes so important. So if you don't mind, could you give us an introduction into the whole data behind it and that backend stuff, and then we'll start from there.
Excellent. So Yes, you are correct. When people start a business, you're often focusing on what's important at that point in time, which absolutely is marketing and sales, right? Is getting the operations up and running, and then trying to drive more cash into the business. But as a company or an organization grows, eventually you get to a point where that only takes you so far. Moreover, you start to grow a lot more of a data estate, is what we call it. So you get a lot more maybe departments or a lot more people doing a lot more things in your organization. And when that happens, things get complicated very quickly. And it's often quite hard to stay on top of the amount of data and information that's flying at you. And so that's when something like what I do in data and analytics becomes very important. So it really enables you to capture and store all of that data, and then most importantly, do something with it. So you can perform analytics on it to derive those KPIs or to derive those measures, and then feed them back to your organization. And so that feedback loop of capturing information, applying insights and analytics, and then delivering it back to your organization effectively is business intelligence. Or it goes by many names, to be frank. And I'll cover some of them shortly, but that's effectively the act of business intelligence. And yeah, I think there's no real idea of how many people you have to have before you adopt business intelligence. 2, 3, 4 is a good number. 1's a good number. 100's a good number, right? It really depends on when you want to take that next step and really focus on that feedback loop, capturing, analyzing, and reporting on data.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. The sooner you start, the better. Especially, I mean, if you start a business and you have no plans of growing it beyond 10, 15, 20K a month, then maybe you really don't need special BI tools, and you can just capture a few KPIs in Google Sheet or Excel, and that could be sufficient. But if you have any wish to grow it to 7 figures and beyond, then the earlier you start, the better, because you can put all the good foundations in place, and then you just add on top of those foundations. And when I'm working with entrepreneurs and leaders, I often tell them that for majority of business decisions, I think and I feel is really not the right way to make business decisions. And for that, we need data. So before we start capturing, before we start analyzing, we need to have a plan in place, I guess, on why are we doing that? What do we want to get out of that? We want to start with that strategic level. And, I know that you certainly help your clients with that initial process as well. So how should an entrepreneur start? Maybe they're at a place where they're watching this and they say, having a bit more data would probably really help me in making better business decisions. So how do I start? Where do I start?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So how do you get started, right? The truth of the matter is that you probably already have a lot of data in your business. Maybe you're not capturing it. Maybe you are capturing it. You don't know what to do with it. But the reality is that most businesses generate data simply as a byproduct of day-to-day operations. So that could be something like an Excel workbook. Of course, it could be Google Sheets, right? That's, in my opinion, a great place to start. There's a saying, what's the biggest BI tool in the world? Well, it's Excel, right? Now, Microsoft Excel runs the planet. If there was one tool if it were to be removed, I think civilization would probably collapse if Excel were removed. So there are a lot of business processes run on Excel. There's a lot of reporting and a lot of analytics and a lot of models that are developed in Excel. That is all business intelligence. The catch with Excel, though, is that it can be difficult to scale. It's difficult to govern. And it can be quite complicated as well, especially as you start growing and more people get their finger in that pie. So I say start with Excel. It's a great place to get your hands dirty with data. It's a phenomenal tool. And it lets you do anything. But just be aware that along with that power to do anything with Excel comes a bit of responsibility, because you can very quickly do bad and incorrect things in Excel. For example, you could have a formula pointing to the wrong cell, and then you make a business decision based on an incorrect model inside Excel, and all of a sudden things go south rather quickly. So what I suggest, look at what you have available, look at your operations, and ask yourself the question, is this generating data? more than likely it is. Then ask yourself the question, how do I capture that data? How do I store it? For example, every day I go to a website, I click, export the data, export as CSV. Maybe I do that every day. Maybe I just save it to my computer. That's the first step. And then as a very easy next step, start bringing it into Excel. Start seeing what data is in front of you. That's your data estate. That's your data landscape. Become familiar with what you have, because that's often going to guide what you can do with it. It's all well and good, and I hear this all the time, people starting with a top-down approach and like, this is the metric that I want. It can be challenging to start with that approach because you don't often have the data to support it. So I suggest capture your data, store it, become familiar with it, understand what's available. And that's really going to act as a bit of a muse or a bit of a guide on what you can do, what the art of the possible is. So that's what I suggest. Long story short.
Okay, no, that's really good. I mean, and you're right. I mean, if you have a Facebook ads account, you're generating data. If you have a Facebook page, you're generating data. Instagram, TikTok, whatever is a business account offers you some sort of analytics, some sort of data, and often we can export that and we can put those things together and we can create even more graphs and visualizations than the tool by itself gives us. And you have so many tools that you can plug in on top of your Facebook just to give you a more in-depth view what's happening, who's visiting, where they're from. Google Analytics, another source of data, and most often we have those things. Even if you have a very small website, we probably have it attached to Google Analytics, and that is data. And we are just we take it so much for granted that we don't even understand that that's data. It's just there, and most often we don't use it. And that's exactly what I want to go to next. So we started gathering data, but now that data alone will, and on one hand, of course, that's why clients hire me, because they've never been into that part of the entrepreneurial world, and I help them figuring out what are the most important KPIs, what benchmarks should they look at, and so on. But if they don't hire a coach, is it good to hire somebody who is data analyst, or do we need somebody on a higher level to figure out the top down once we have certain amount of data?
Yeah, so what I find more often than not is a business intelligence department in an organization organically grows. That's not the answer that I'm going to say is best, but I'm just saying that it's my observation. Analytics and data and BI, or business intelligence departments, organically grow, oftentimes not in the best way. So to your point, Miha, yes, it is good to bring someone in to lay down those foundations, to have a very strong data foundation. Now, before I gave the example of beginning with Excel, and I would like to emphasize, yes, begin with Excel. It's a great place to begin, but you will hit critical mass. You will hit a point where Excel doesn't do what you want. And at that point, you need those foundations. So I think that what you really need to do is start with Excel. And then once you feel that things are getting a little unwieldy or out of control, bring in an expert. Bring in someone like myself or someone from the industry who can help lay the foundations. And some examples of when this might start to happen are, you can pull from GA or Google Analytics just fine, right? You can pull from Facebook just fine. This call that we're having right now, this LinkedIn live chat, you can pull data from that just fine. The biggest challenge you're going to face is when you start bringing those data sets together, right? And that's probably when you start to need an expert. It's not an easy thing to do. For example, if you have one of your customers' names inside your Google Analytics data source, and you have that exact customer name inside your Facebook data source, what if his name's John Smith? How do you know he's the same person, right? So business intelligence has a lot of very sophisticated and well time-tested processes, tools, and methodologies to handle that question. Different data sources, same person. How do you make sure they're the same person? You need to know that to perform proper analytics. So bring in an expert. He'll lay that foundation and get what we call a data model up and running quite early for your business. And that data model is just what it sounds like. It's a model of your data across your disparate data sources, and working in such a way that it's fault tolerant, it's future proofed, and ideally no one can break it. And so once you have that data model that's created by an expert up and running, it's very easy then to bring in a tool like Excel or Power BI to connect to that data model and start deriving insights in a safe and secure manner that Excel can't do.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Power BI because that is always my preferred tool of choice. It's just so good, and you can connect it to a whole bunch of things natively. I mean, it's still I wouldn't set it up myself, but as a user later on, it just gives you so much power of all the dashboards and things that you can put. I mean, if you set it up correctly with the right help from somebody who understands and knows how to do those things, you can literally spend maybe 5 to 10 minutes per day, and you just look at a few key elements in your business, and you know exactly where you are and when you're going, because you can have those future graphs and cash flow predicaments and stuff like that, and you can safely run your company with 5, 10, 15 minutes a day, and you can become a quite passive shareholder but still having that oversight. Because one thing that BI solves and entrepreneurs have a huge problem with is trust. So how do we become more passive if we don't trust the system, if we don't trust people behind the system? And it's not sometimes that we think that they're lying. We just might not trust them that they make the best decisions or something like that. Well, first of all, why did you hire them? But with a tool like a BI, you can be on top without having to spend 8 hours in the business. And I think that is one of the biggest values for entrepreneurs at a bit later stage when they're starting to exit the active part in the business.
Oh, absolutely. And, it comes down to leading with data, right? So what do I mean by that? Leading with data, it's making decisions. It's taking those steps backed by an informed decision, effectively. So to become a data-driven decision maker, you need tools like Power BI. And to Mihal's point, that's exactly it. You can spend 5 to 10 minutes every day running a report through a tool like Power BI, and it's all automated. It's gone through all the checks and balances, and that report's not going to lie to you, right? So long as it's set up correctly, and you have the checks and balances in place, that report's always going to be correct. So when it comes down to trust, so long as it's set up correctly, trust isn't really a question. Like, data is data, and the insights are the insights. If the insights are wrong, then oftentimes the data is wrong and someone set it up incorrectly, or the source that generates the data is generating incorrect data. So I think ultimately it comes down to making better and more informed decisions with confidence. Okay? Yeah. And if that's something that you're interested in, which I hope it is, that's what these tools and this capability will give you. You can take those steps forward and be rest assured that you're backed by data.
Simon, when I started diving into this whole big data stuff back in my last startup, because before that, I really didn't know about all these things. I mean, I did use Excel. I had plenty of data around me, but I never figured out, let's put those things together, let's use it. And maybe the hardest thing for me was that, you see data, let's say you go into Google Analytics, and you see a whole bunch of numbers and different data and some pie charts and this and that, and you don't really understand what to do with it. And maybe if you could just share a few examples of what kind of useful data, so that we can back a decision behind it, we could get from a typical BI setup, to help us with marketing, with sales, with delivery, with customer experience, things that are cash flow generating, which most entrepreneurs are focused on to anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. So just some examples of like what that looks like. So for a business owner, right, have you ever reviewed a profit and loss statement? I would hope you have. So how is that profit and loss statement generated? Generally it's generated through a system, an automated system. You press a button that was designed by someone who does business intelligence. The report was pulled from usually one source in the case of a profit and loss, and the data was pulled from that one source, and out pops your profit and loss statement. For the folk in marketing, campaign analysis, right? Maybe you're trying to determine which market segment you'd like to target. So this is more of a pointed question. You can develop a report using data and analytics to answer that question. Accountant, if you're an accountant, ever done a reconciliation or a WIP or an AR or an AP report, right? These are all forms of analyses on data. And very importantly are your operational teams. So depending on your industry, that changes dramatically, but whatever your operational team is and those KPIs that you've come up for them are, you need to be able to capture and report back what those KPIs are in as real time as possible to your operational teams. And for the leaders out there, right? I mean, your Excel models, your PowerPoint decks, your Power BI dashboards, all of these are examples of business intelligence in action.
Yeah, I mean, the more real time we can check on the KPIs and match them with some benchmarking, the easier and faster we can see patterns and we can start, making decisions. Now, I want to hear your opinion, but when I'm working with my clients, so one thing is to set KPIs. The other thing, in my view, is that only when you match that with benchmarks, you are looking at the full story, because KPI might not mean enough without a benchmark behind it.
Yeah.
And when we start talking about benchmarks, I often tell them that, as far as I know, you can do it 4 ways. You can benchmark against past results, past data. You can benchmark it against future predictions or future plans, against industry standards, which in many cases are not that hard to find on the internet. Not for all industries, but marketing, you can find averages, and then of course the best one, but that's the hardest one to find, would be benchmarking against competition. In my last startup, we were really lucky to be in energy efficiency market, and there were a lot of big players like Schneider, Siemens, and so on, and they were constantly pushing out case studies, and in those case studies they were revealing certain numbers, and so we were able to get that and then benchmark certain things against our competitors. But yeah, that one is not. But are there any other ways to set up the whole KPI processes and then backed by KPIs and benchmarking, or am I missing something? Would you add something on top of all of that?
I think that's a good summary. That's a phenomenal summary. I can highlight something that I see quite often, though, just a mistake that many people make. They think that, to your point before, putting some numbers in a pie chart and a bar chart is enough. And they think, okay, I've done my dashboard, I can go about my business now. And to your point exactly, someone opens up that report and they ask themselves, well, what am I supposed to do with this? I see that happen all the time. And that's really the key difference between what I would call a measure and a KPI. So in my mind, the measure is just your sum of sales. Like, what were my sales yesterday? That's a measure, right? It doesn't really tell you anything. It doesn't give you any action, right? It just gives you a number. So that's when a KPI comes into it. And that's when you start needing to comparing that number, that sum of your sales, to something. And that's what I would call a KPI. And there's many ways to develop it. And to your point, Michal, yes, there are a lot of organizations out there that actually sell that data. One interesting one that I like citing is a company in the States that actually have 6% of everyone's credit card transactions in all of the United States of America. So imagine that at the transaction level, mind you. So they've got 6% of everyone's spending habits across America. And that's one way that you can look at that data to help inform how you make your KPIs. So, it could be something as simple as, how are in-store sales going, right? In foot traffic. into a store. And you might think, well, how can credit card data give you that information? Well, it can when you think about it, because you have the line. You can see that they actually purchased it in the store, and then you can actually measure that and trend that over time, either going up or down. And that can help inform one of your similar KPIs as a benchmark. And you can compare this against externally purchased data. And there are a lot of vendors out there that can provide this information on your competitors to help you come up with internal KPIs.
Yeah, that's a really good way. Yeah, there are a lot of companies out there who just gather data and then repack it, or I mean, just put it in pieces, and then you can say, okay, I'm in trucking industry, and I want to know how much an average truck does throughout my competitors, and how do we benchmark against that, or something
Exactly.
like that. There's a lot of that out there that you can tap into. Of course, you need to pay something, but how valuable might that data be? Well, Simon, I see that we are getting close to the 30-minute mark. So I'm going to ask you this. What is an average process? So let's say I'm at a point where I say, okay, I want to have a BI system in place. I see the value. I understand the value. And I'm going to hire, you with your team. From the moment we first sit down to go through the top level stuff, and then the implementation and putting things together, and then coming up with good module that is unbreakable, and all of what you've explained so far, what am I looking at?
Yeah, so good question. A lot is my answer. So I think a little bit to what you said before, it does begin with an idea of what you're trying to get at. Okay, so most commonly, one of my customers would come to me and say, hey, Simon, here is a series of reports that I would like, or here is the subject area that I would like to do reporting on. So with that in mind, what we would usually start with is an ideation workshop. So we would sit with the client through 1 to 3 to 4 days, depending on the size of the engagement. And we would really look at some of the business challenges. What are the crunchy questions that they're trying to solve for? What is the problem statement? We'll start with that. And then we'll peel back the onion on that over a couple of days until we have a good idea of exactly what they're after. Is the problem statement actually what they're after? Spoiler alert, usually not. And then once we have that full picture after that, 1 to 4 day workshop, we have a plan in place. And so that's kind of that first phase there. That sets up the problem and all the issues and challenges around that problem. And it also paints a picture on what the solution could be. Okay. So at that point, we need to start jumping into action. So without going too deep at a very high level, in fact, there's actually a model online that describes this quite eloquently. And it's called the CRISP DM model. So that stands for Cross-Industry Standard Practices in Data Mining. And it really breaks it down to a few different sections. So I'll first talk through those, and then I'll talk through the actual application of those. So this CRISP DM model, once you have your problem statement established and an idea of where you want to go, first we need that business understanding. So we're going to have a deep dive on the business, on the industry, how it works, how it operates. Then we need a data understanding. So that means doing an inventory of all of my customers' data, usually as it pertains to the problem that we're trying to solve. So we try to understand all of their data. At that point, we'll move into a data preparation phase where we wrangle all the data. We will model that data. So we'll make sure that the data can talk to each other. And then we'll evaluate to see if our model does actually make sense. And then finally, we'll deploy it. So that's the CRISP DM model in order. But what does it actually mean from a real world standpoint? So what it means is this. From that first phase of business understanding, we're going to sit with the client and say, for example, let's say it's finance related. They want to get a better understanding of their finance system. So we'll sit with them and we'll understand, look, what are your processes? Betty from accounting, what does she do every Monday through Friday? What is the process that she goes through to produce an accounts receivable report? And we'll repeat that for the whole finance department. We'll get a pretty good picture of everyone, what they do and their processes in that department. That's your business understanding. Next, we'll go to a data understanding. And this is really where my team excels, right? This is when we have to roll up our sleeves and do some technical analysis. So this is when we'll connect to the finance system, but also all the systems that are connected to the finance system and any other system that could be in scope. And so we will have a look at the databases, we'll look at the Excel files, we'll look at the CSV files, you name it, we're going to look at it. And we're really looking to inventory that data. And so, for example, one database could have 1,000 tables inside of it. We want to really interrogate each table and see what's inside of it, what can we use, what's available. So that's your data understanding. And then we move to data preparation. So data preparation is, okay, we now understand the lay of the land. What can we do about that? Well, what we can do is we can start bringing that data into an environment where we can start cleaning it and doing some data quality checks, just to make sure the data does meet our expectations. And then once that's done, we move on to data modeling, which is my bread and butter. It's what I've specialized in my career. So data modeling is really around creating this thing that I mentioned earlier on in this call called a data model. And what that is a way to store your data in such a fashion that is very easy to query. So using Betty from accounting again, if you have a data model up and running, she can very easily ask of it, what were my sales yesterday for department ABC? Very simply, she can ask that question and the data model will return the answer. So that's what a data model is. And once that's done, we will evaluate. We will look back retrospectively and say, have we accomplished the initial ask that was in that ideation workshop? If we have, finally, we'll deploy it. And we'll have that product moved into a production environment where the whole organization can benefit from it. So a bit of a long-winded answer there, but hopefully gave you a good idea of that end-to-end process.
No, that's absolutely perfect. And yeah, it's very vital that people understand that data needs to be processed and worked through. I'll give one example. So when we were working in energy efficiency, so we connected our BI with different utility companies, and some utility companies would measure energy data in 5 minutes, and some would do it in 15 minutes. And so because if you want to extrapolate that over the whole organization, you need to bring all of that data together and find a common thing, how you can you either break down the 15-minute one, or you increase the 5-minute one up to 15 minutes, but you have to do something, otherwise the data going forward would not make sense. So that was one example that we had to overcome, and it was not just the electricity, it was the same with gas and other stuff, and a whole bunch of things were coming in different dimensions, and we had to I think the process was called ETL, if I'm not mistaken. And so that software was doing all the crunching. So the data would first go into one database, and then the ETL would do the thing, and then it would go into a cleaned up SQL database from where BI was able to start doing the things that BI needs to do. So that was how I understood the whole process.
Exactly. And I like to say it's kind of like, we've all seen that picture online of an iceberg, right? And you just see the tip. And so you see those beautiful dashboards. But what you don't realize is exactly what Miha said. Underneath the water is a massive amount of primarily what Miha referred to as ETL, or extract, transform, and loading. So the extraction of data, the transformation of data, then the loading of that data to a database for consumption. So that is a lot of work. That's all the plumbing, right? That's what what a role called a data engineer focuses on, is getting all of that plumbing set up, and then making sure that it's delivered in a repeatable and future-proof fashion. So you're spot on there. That's absolutely the bulk of the work.
Yeah, that's how I understood it, that was the hardest part. Once you have that cleaned up database that comes out, then, I mean, of course, you still need to be you still need to know what you want out of it and what KPIs, and sometimes those formulas were really, really long, because in our case, buildings were at different latitudes. They were covered by different systems to measure temperature and wind and stuff, and we had to compare that data with energy consumption, because if it's sunny, if it's colder, if it's higher up, lower up, you can't put apples and pears together, and figure out that you'll get something out of it. So there was a lot work done, and a lot of that was on ETL, translating all that information into useful form for our other guys who were then translating that into BI form. But two more quick things, Simon. So the number one, you are super passionate and you are extremely knowledgeable in this department. So if anybody in our audience wants to connect with you, you have a subreddit that you are putting a lot of attention into. You can mention that, but are there other ways how people can get in touch with you and have a chat with you?
Yeah, so Miha called out one of them. I am the moderator of the Power BI subreddit. So if you are a member of Reddit, which many people are, please head on over and subscribe. We're only a few thousand people away on hitting our 50,000 member milestone. So time is of the essence. I'm really excited for that milestone. So please register for the Power BI subreddit. In terms of contacting me, LinkedIn is fine. Miha, maybe I can provide my email address later for work. But LinkedIn's a great place to contact me.
Okay, and now I see we have a question here. I'm just not sure if StreamYard will show the whole question because it's quite a long one. Oh yeah, it's showing the whole. So can you see it on the screen?
Yes. Would you like me to try and condense it?
Yes, please.
So when bringing in disparate or many different types of data, what is the approach to, I guess, connect them together? And so the question goes on to say, if we have a lot of databases, a lot of data in general, how is this handled? And it suggests graph databases. So the act of doing this is something called dimensional data modeling. So that's the formal act of doing this. So what dimensional data modeling says, and it was largely founded by a gentleman called Ralph Kimball and Bill Inmon. So I'll stick to the Ralph Kimball version. So it's the act of getting data together, wrangling it, and making sure that it conforms. And that's the special keyword that I'm using there. So there is something called a conformed dimension. And it's an approach to make sure that if you have two tables of data, there is a common denominator table of data between them, so they can speak the same common language. So, I mean, without going into too much more detail, which we can do definitely on a follow-up call, Miha, because that's effectively what Power BI is. It's the act of dimensional data modeling. That's effectively it. But one thing was raised around, right at the end of that question, something around graph DBs. So graph databases are a special type of database. So in the world of data, we've got our SQL or our SQL database, which is your mainstay that most applications use. Emerging over the last, I'd say, 5 to 10 years is a new type of database, a new way to store data called a graph database. And you wouldn't really use that to maintain relationships or to manage relationships, let's put it that way. A graph database has to have that already done for it to be effective. Using my example before of John Smith, if the spelling was slightly off on his name, a graph database wouldn't know that they relate. However, with a traditional database, you can build in a process to say that they do relate, and that is that dimensional model. So graph databases are quite an advanced topic. It's usually used by companies like Facebook, LinkedIn, for example, to test relationships between data. Not physical data relationships, but semantic relationships. For example, I know Miha, Miha might know Bill Gates, and Bill Gates is best friends with Satya Nadella. And so I can actually get connected with Satya Nadella by speaking to Miha. You can speak to Bill, you can speak to Satya. So that's what a graph database tries to answer, that kind of question.
Interesting, very interesting. Well, Simon, just a quick one before we say goodbye. Did I forgot to ask anything that you feel is very important and you want to share with the audience right now on what we covered so far, without going too much into what we will cover next time?
Yeah, so I mean, just I guess a final point. Something to raise with this topic is that, believe it or not, but good data and analytics in an organization is kind of a hidden secret. And by that, I mean, you probably hear that everyone does data and analytics, but I promise you that 99% of your competitors who say they're doing it, they're just not. It's likely 2 or 3 people doing it on the side of their desk using an Excel workbook. So I guess on that note, look, don't wait. If this is something that you think there is value in, the sooner you implement a good platform for data and analytics, the sooner you're going to get a competitive advantage. Just make sure that you do it right. Make sure that you have a correct foundation, because that will scale. Everyone else, well, most organizations who say they're doing data analytics are not doing it in a properly scalable way. So that's, I guess, like a bit of parting wisdom there. So don't wait. Go out there, get it started, get that foundation built.
I absolutely agree. And I agree that you always need to start with solid foundations. That's how you build a good, solid business. That's how you build a good, solid BI system that will support you. Start with the good foundations, and then it's very easy to scale and grow that later on. But if you don't put good foundations in, and that might happen if you try too much on your own without understanding things in a good way, it might cost you a whole lot later on when you try to fix it. So yeah,
Maybe
I
I should take that
absolutely
back.
agree.
Maybe I should take that back and, make mistakes. Call me up in a few years' time. Let's do that one.
Well, Simon, thank you so much for taking the time today, and thank you so much that we will do this once more and dive even deeper. It was an absolute pleasure talking to you, and I really, really hope that we are able to shed some light on this back end stuff that most entrepreneurs don't want to look at, but it can have such an impact on everything that you do on the front end as well. And so thank you for that, and thank you again to Brendan for connecting us together. And I just wish you all the best going forward, and I'm already looking to our next chat.
Excellent. So am I. Thank you for your time, Miha.
Take care. Bye bye.
Cheers. Bye.
Okay, guys, let me just quickly recap, because I don't want to make this too long, because then some people don't watch the replay, and I really want everybody to watch this replay. Super important topic. I know that you all know me for the EQ and soft skills and communications and this and that, but this is a huge part of how we help our clients, and what I'm also deeply passionate about. We need to balance, the soft stuff and the hard stuff, and this is vital, very vital for any organization, every company. If you have any wish to go to 7-8 figures, start thinking now how you will start implementing this. Start easy, like Simon said, but then build on top of that, and talk to Simon. I'm not the right person, so when we work with our clients, we suggest them on these systems and we help them from a business side, but then we work very closely with people like Simon and teams like that, to help the organization get a BI in place. If you ever want to be a passive shareholder and take a step back, you need a BI system. That BI system will give you the trust that you need to take a step back from the company and work less. The whole point of our 4-hour a week Operation Firehouse is to have a system like that that backs you up. So as much as I'm passionate about the soft stuff, I'm very, very deeply passionate about this stuff as well, because I know the value. I've seen the value with myself, with my clients. And so I really, really, really want to invite everybody. If you want, reach out to Simon, say, hi, I saw your interview with Miha. Have a chat with him. It will do crazy good stuff for you and your organization if you take that step. But without me going too much overboard with my random ramblings, thank you for being here. Happy Monday. Stay safe, stay healthy. I know there's a lot of craziness going on around the world. Next Monday, we're back with another amazing interview. See you then. Bye.